Thank you all for coming today for the second installment of our three-part winter lecture series. The next and final lecture will take place March 22nd and will be New Perspectives on the Poverty Point World Heritage Site by Michael Hargrave, PhD, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Today's lecture is by Elizabeth Watts Malouchos. Liz is the research scientist at Indiana University's Glenn A. Black Laboratory of Archaeology. In this position, she directs IU's new campus archaeology contract program and researches the archaeology of Indiana and the broader Midwest. Her research explores the relationships between social identities and the construction of the built environment during the Mississippian period, particularly in the Angel Mounds polity of southwestern Indiana. Liz uses remote sensing and targeted excavations to understand how communities outside of the Angel Mound Center built their houses in organized communal space and how these architectural practices connected communities across the wider region. Let's welcome Elizabeth Watts Malouchos as she presents her program, Architectural Alignments and Lunar Landscapes, Tracing the Construction of Angel Communities in Southwestern Indiana.
Hi, does this sound all right to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming out on this dreary Sunday. Much appreciated. Before I get started, I just want to take a moment to recognize that Cahokian Mounds in the wider American Bottom region are the ancestral lands of many indigenous communities and tribes, not all of whom are listed here. And you're going to have to indulge me a little bit here at the beginning of my talk. Cahokia and the American Bottom are where I fell in love with archaeology. Here I am as a field school student at the Finger site in Sauget. So again, I just fell in love with archaeology, specifically digging Mississippian sites here in the American Bottom. So after I graduated, I began working for the Illinois State Archaeological Survey. I worked at sites all over the American Bottom for a few years. And then even when I switched my research to Indiana, I always took every opportunity to come back and work here. Here I am at the Emerald site in 2015. And finally, in 2016, I worked on a project run by Sarah Byrace and Melissa Baltus, exploring the Spring Lake track. So Woodhenge is here. Here's the spring. That's my daughter making noise, by the way. So everybody can just remember that cute baby as a takeaway from my talk today. So you're here at the Interpretive Center, and we did some remote sensing and excavation over here. So it was the first time I got to work at Cahokia proper, which was really exciting. And importantly, I found my very first piece of Ramey incised pottery, and there happened to be a media team there to capture my dance and my screams of enjoyment on film. So thank you for indulging me. Today I'm actually going to be talking to you about Angel Mounds, another Mississippian center in southwestern Indiana on the Ohio. So I'll introduce a little background about Angel Mounds, a brief history of the excavations there. Then I'm going to talk to you about the community organization at Angel, how the mounds were built and organized, and sort of the chronology of Angel. Then I'm going to talk to you about a remote sensing method called LIDAR, light and, oh my gosh, why am I blinking? Light and detection ranging. Thank you very much. That's what the acronym stands for. And what that's told us about the community organization at Angel Mounds. Then I'm going to switch to focus more on my research, which looks at the hinterland sites, all of the communities outside of Angel, the smaller villages, and look at what community organization in those villages tells us about how they relate to Angel Mounds. And then I'm going to talk about a little fun sort of regional-wide practice that I've discovered of Mississippians reusing Middle Woodland lithic tools. So again, the Mississippian world, of course, is much wider than Cahokia or Angel. It really took up much of the eastern half of the United States. We're here right now, and I'm going to be talking to you about Angel. which is just east of modern-day Evansville, Indiana. So it's right on the Ohio, and Evansville is right here to give you an idea. So Angel Mounds started around AD 1050 and was abandoned by AD 1450. It consisted of 11 earthen mounds, both flat-topped pyramidal rectangular mounds and smaller conical mounds, and had several iterations of a large palisade fortification wall that circumscribed the site. I will mention sort of offhand the 3 different angel phases. So the chronology is Angel 1 somewhere around AD 1050 to about AD 1200, Angel 2 AD 1200 to 1300, and Angel 3 about AD 1300 to AD 1450. So just to give you a little background on the timing of Angel. This is an artist's reconstruction of what Angel would have looked like, coming at it from looking east, sort of at a bird's eye view. This is Mound A, the biggest and oldest mound at Angel, one of the larger palisade walls, and then some reconstructed houses. And this is a view from looking west over Mound A at Angel today. Just kind of a pretty picture to give you an idea. So this is Glenn A. Black, the namesake of my laboratory. Sort of the iconic photos of him. He led excavations starting in 1939 and continued until his death in 1964. So that was IU's first involvement really with the Angel site, was through doing field schools throughout the late 40s and 1950s with Glenn Black. This is probably the most iconic picture of Glenn Black, always with a smoke hanging out of his mouth and usually a smile on his face. Those excavations in 1939 were part of the Works Progress Administration, so you can see the large WPA crew here on the left, and they're actually sitting on top of Mound F, which they excavated most of the way down to the base of the mound. But they also worked on some residential areas of just houses and sort of regular domestic refuse. And that was really one of the most important things that happened during those early WPA excavations at Angel, is that Glenn Black not only focused on mound construction and excavated parts of mounds and the palisade and this monumental architecture that was still standing, but he targeted what we call the East Village, this portion of Angel right here, which this is a plan map of all the features found, and as you can see, it's a really densely packed residential neighborhood. So all of these lines represent the remains of basically residential household architecture. So you can see there are houses on top of houses on top of houses on top of houses. And this is sort of a very rough visual chronology of Angel. So just prior to 1050 AD, Mounds A and F are constructed. Nothing else was at the site, and as far as we can tell, nobody lived there. It seemed to be a pretty vacant ceremonial center at that junction. Sometime around 1200, the outer palisade was built. That was the first one, and then it shrunk in time. The rest of the mounds were built sometime after 1200 AD. And then at that time, I'm just highlighting the East Village here. That's when you see people living at Angel within the confines of the palisade. Sometime around 1300, the palisade shrinks into this inner wall, this iteration of the inner wall. And then by 1450, some of the last events that we know about at Angel are the structures that were on top of Mound A and F were burned, and then the mounds were capped with more soil before the site was abandoned. Something else to come out of Glenn Black, we know all of this not only through Glenn Black's excavations, but also because of all of the legacy data he created. So he collected 2.5 million artifacts from Angel that are now, 2.5 million, a lot. Most of those, about 1.8 million, are ceramic sherds. Another good chunk are the faunal remains, and then sort of the rest of the materials that you might expect, but mostly ceramics. So not only did we learn from his actual investigations and his direct research, but we learned through the research that's been done in the decades since on the legacy data that he collected. But one thing that he pointed out was that Mound A seemed to have a particular alignment that he and other researchers posited at about 22 to 24 degrees east of north. So that sort of very roughly aligns within like 5 to 10 degrees of some solstice events. So that sort of organizational axis at Angel, that's how it was discussed up until recently, that it may be aligned to the sun, but not precisely. So not only was Mound A aligned in that direction, but also Mound F. Structures on top of Mounds D, B, and J, and also a western portion of the Palisade all shared this sort of structural angel alignment. Now I wanted to talk to you about sort of a new remote sensing method, light detection and ranging. Now I remember how to say it. Essentially, you have some sort of aerial method of shooting laser pulses at the ground. And what it does, those laser pulses happen at such frequency that they can penetrate the tree canopy and also vegetation on the ground. So you can get extremely accurate topographic maps, essentially. So LiDAR has really changed the game in archaeology. You may have seen covered in media Mayan cities, whole Mayan cities that have been discovered under the jungle, because in an aerial photograph you can't see anything past the treetops in the jungle, but LiDAR has been able to detect the structures still standing. It's also been very helpful in Mississippian archaeology. So to give you a sense, this is a Google Earth satellite aerial image of Angel Mounds now. The site is small, only 11 earth mounds comparatively to Cahokia, of course. Everything's small compared to Cahokia. And much of the site isn't really covered in trees. But in 2019, we did some drone-based LiDAR as part of the new Indiana Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. I should mention the Glenn Black Laboratory of Archaeology is now going to be subsumed under this new museum, which is really exciting because we have the support of our university president and the governor of Indiana to do some really great research that's focused on angel mounds as part of this museum. So one of the first things was to do some fabulous drone-based LiDAR that has 1 to 2 centimeter resolution. So it may not look totally different, but if you go back, you can see this whole western side outside of the Palisade is covered in trees. Well, now you can see what the ground looks like there. And if you zoom in, it doesn't look much, but you can see some small depressions here, over here that probably represent structure basins that on the ground out there or using other sort of survey methods, it's really hard to detect. But with this fine grain LiDAR data, we're able to see some of these things that you just can't see in person. You can also see the limits of excavation of Glenn's excavations of the East Village over there, where it gets nice and fuzzy. And it looks pretty prominent here, but when you were on the ground there, I even had a colleague crawl on his hands and knees to try and delineate sort of the border right here, and he couldn't find it. So this LiDAR is really amazing, particularly when it comes to looking at alignment of things. So recently, William Romaine, an archaeoastronomer, looked at Angel, not this particular LiDAR data set, an earlier set that's not as fine-grained. He would really love to see this, I know he would. But looking at LiDAR, he was able to adjust the alignment. So previously, people kind of guessed between, or hypothesized really, 22 and 24 degrees. Well, he was able to pinpoint that the angel axis is actually at 22.9 degrees, so almost 23. And that's important because it lines up to a movement of the moon, the northern minimum lunar standstill moonset. That is quite a mouthful, and you might be thinking, why on earth is this very obscure movement of the moon very important, and why were people aligning things to it? Well, not just at Angel Mounds. Let me back up one. So the minimum northern moon set, basically the moon has a range. A major standstill marks the outer range, the outermost movements of the moon. and the minimum marks the inner. And these movements only happen every 18.6 years. So the minimum northern lunar moon set only happens every 18.6 years, which makes it even more obscure sounding in terms of why and how are people tracking this. While here at Cahokia, it seems like the city is aligned along a lunar axis. In particular, the southern maximum moonrise, but actually a mirror image of that. But Cahokia is not the only place. The Emerald Acropolis complex in the uplands, just near Lebanon, Illinois, also seems to be aligned to the moon. And this goes back even 1,000 years or before to the Middle Woodland culture from about 100 BC to 500 AD. If you've heard of Ohio Hopewell or Illinois or Havana Hopewell, Middle Woodland folks were building really huge, amazing geometric earthworks. You can see this circle and octagon here. This is the Newark Earthwork in Ohio, and it's aligned to a lunar standstill. So this practice of building mounds, building communities to mark this seemingly obscure every 18.6 years lunar movement actually stems back thousands of years prior to the Mississippian period, and even actually before the Middle Woodland period, but I won't bore you with going back quite that far. So now going back to Angel in Indiana, we know Angel is aligned to the moon. Here are 3 sites outside of Angel Mounds that have received some attention. This whole area was surveyed in the 70s to identify sort of angel-related sites in the region, and then only a few have been excavated. There really isn't a great understanding of how these towns outside of Angel relate to the center, and so that has been part of my research, is looking at the Stephen Stein site in particular to see how all of these towns were sort of integrated into this large regional polity that Angel Mounds was the center of. Typically, people have talked about this type of integration and communities connecting by looking at decorated pottery. When you have sets of decorated pottery that are the same across sites, you can tell that those sites are related or have some sort of interaction. At Angel, there's a very famous type of pottery called Angel negative painted pottery. It mostly happens on plates. I use the analogy of the salad bowls from Olive Garden, if you've ever had a salad at Olive Garden, or the fancy soup bowls that are shallow but have a really large rim around them. That's sort of what these plates looked like, and they were made using a really complex resist painting technique, and you can see in these really fabulous cosmological designs. So you find these plates all over the place at Angel, but at outlying sites, they're basically not there. At Stephen Stein Camp, where I and some other researchers from Indiana University have been doing excavations, only this sort of pathetic looking negative painted shirt was found during excavations. You can see the density in the East Village at Angel, and even buried in mounds at Angel, you have a lot of negative painted pottery, and sites outside, you really don't have it. The Eller Bush sites, one of the sites I'm going to talk about, doesn't have any evidence of negative painted pottery. So pottery really wasn't going to help us figure out how all of these communities are connected together and integrated. So I focused on the Stephen Stein campsite because it really hadn't been excavated much. And I wanted to use a different remote sensing technique to get at how communities were organized. So I used magnetic radiometry, or magnetometry, you'll hear me sort of refer it to, which is a non-invasive, non-destructive technique. Essentially, I wear this machine that looks like a football goalpost, and it measures really subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic field. So these variations can be created by people living and disturbing the soil that you're walking over. So the concentrations of organic matter that typically accumulate with trash and debris that during the Mississippian period would have been sort of chucked into house basins that weren't being used anymore, or middens, trash middens, or into pits to fill them up. The bacteria excrete a tiny amount of iron particles, and those iron particles can be detected by the magnetometer, which is really fabulous. So anytime you have sort of an infilled trash area or something that's been infilled with soil that's been organically enriched just from humans living around it, you can get a magnetic signature. Also thermal variations, so the types of parts that would have been used during the Mississippian period really show up well in magnetometry, or if a structure burned down, that burning gives off a nice signature. Or iron-rich artifacts, so historic nails, agricultural equipment, things that we don't want to interfere in our surveys of pre-contact sites give off really strong signatures, and of course do. Here you have, this is the wall trench pattern. This is the architectural plan of a structure from the Stephenstein campsite. That's what it looks like in the magnetometry results. The strong signatures are here in black, and those are usually burned or really iron-rich areas. And you can see that this is an excavation plan of one of the structures at Angel Mounds. And of course, you can just walk outside and look to your right when you're leaving, and you can see some of the architectural plans that were found here at Cahokian to the right, painted on the ground, when they were excavating for this museum. So these are the magnetometry results. I want to take a second and say that the Stephenstein campsite had previously been defined right here. My magnetometry results sort of blow the size, or the site size, out of the water of what it was thought previously to be. Unfortunately, my magnetometry survey was halted because when I was doing it, this area was flooded. This is a slough that is seasonally flooded, and of course, a nice big patch of woods there did not help anything. But this is the Ohio River right here, so we're very close. Zoomed in a little bit, you can get a better sense. All of these square anomalies, those all represent residential structures. There's a nice linear anomaly at the top, which likely represents a palisade wall or some sort of fortification ditch. There's an area here that you can see is sort of devoid of those anomalies, which is probably a central plaza. And this lovely thing is a gas pipeline that blew out all of my results underneath. So when I said it reacts strongly to iron-rich objects like steel, I meant it. So yeah, that was an unfortunate discovery when we found out there was a gas pipeline that went underneath the road, but live and learn. So the first thing I did, looking at these results, was start to define all of these structures. So those are in blue squares there, and sort of immediately you get a sense for there's kind of a striking organization here. But a lot of the structures seem to be oriented the same way. You can see I just highlighted it sort of with a yellow area there, and even this open plaza area seems to sort of share that orientation. And it's oriented within basically 0.2 degrees of the Angel axis. So it seems like the Stephenstein campsite was built essentially to the same alignment. I don't go into my excavations in this talk, but I excavated this structure here that seemed to be aligned, and it was rebuilt 5 times in place. So that's probably one of the earliest structures. There was nothing on top of it. It's right next to the open plaza, and it was rebuilt 5 times in place. And it is perfectly aligned to the Angel axis. So you can see here in orange the number of structures that align within plus or minus 2 degrees of the Angel axis. And then sort of almost 61% generally adhere. They're just outside of that plus or minus 2 degrees, so I can't include them, but they seem to sort of follow that general organization. So a third very precisely aligned, and then almost 2/3 very generally aligned. Looking at sites outside of Angel, other than the Stephenstein campsite, starting with Southwind, that's just downriver from Stephenstein Camp. This is the community plan. Most of this site was excavated in the 1980s by Indiana University. You can see that already there are some pretty obvious similarities with Stephenstein Camp. They both share some sort of linear, probably feature or fortification. At least you can see it on Stephen Stein Camp on the north. They're organized around a central plaza, and then large structures sort of on the northwest side seem to be aligned to the Angel Axis, and then 17% at Southwind are within plus or minus 2 degrees. So a little less, but Southwind also dates a bit earlier than Stephen Stein Camp. Southwind probably dates to early Angel, and Stephen Stein Camp seems to be much later, happening at the end of Angel. Looking at the Ellerbush site, which is just a small hamlet, but it's very close to Angel. This is the community plan. So 3 structures, some rebuilt several times. And as you may have guessed, one of them is in alignment with the Angel Axis, almost exactly. And that structure was rebuilt in place several times. So the 3 sites, the 3 habitation sites outside of Angel that we know of, all of them seem to be organized around the same Angel Axis. Now at Angel itself, in the East Village, I showed you that complex architectural map that Glenn Black dug. He excavated 89 structures. Interestingly, only one of the 89 structures that he excavated was aligned following the Angel Axis, and this is within the confines of the Angel Palisade. This structure here, which is, the East Village is here, so this is a little bit removed from the East Village, but you can see it's very close to Mound A. In 2010, Stefan Peterson did a site-wide magnetometry survey at Angel. So this is on a much bigger scale than my magnetometry survey of Stephen Stein Camp. And all these tiny little, what look like black dots, those are actually structures. So you can see that those structures illustrated here and actually broken into different neighborhoods that Stefan classified them in. So I wanted to see how many of those structures that were magnetically identified aligned to the Angel Axis. And it turns out only 15 of the 237 that were magnetically identified, so about 6% aligned to the Angel Axis, which is actually pretty low in numbers and lower than what I expected, being the Angel is the place where this alignment was memorialized into the landscape through the mound architecture. Oh, and these 2 neighborhoods more generally aligned, but not, again, not within plus or minus 2 degrees. So you can see here the percentages, the different percentages throughout the region of residential structures that align to the Angel Axis. Again, Angel excavated, that's just 1 out of 89. Magnetic, 15 out of 237. But Southwind excavated, you have 17%, 40%, 33%. A good amount at outlying sites. So I thought that was really interesting in that, one, the outlying sites are organizing their households and communities to this particular, very particular lunar alignment, and that also you don't see that happening as much at Angel Mounds. So it seems that it's important to construct the landscape at Angel, the monumental landscape rather, the mounds, the palisade, to that alignment, whereas at outlying sites you don't have mounds, the palisades don't follow that alignment, but you see residential architecture. So people at outlying sites are sort of structuring their everyday movements or their everyday experience to that Angel alignment by aligning their households. So even if your house wasn't aligned to the Angel Axis, you would be moving around your community or neighborhood where other houses would have been very strictly aligned. Sort of tying together all of those communities. So this was a really interesting way that the communities, again, all shared one practice that seems to integrate them. But it doesn't just integrate outlying communities with Angel, it seems to integrate the whole Angel region within the wider Cahokian world and the Cahokian cosmology, because Cahokia itself is aligned to lunar movements, and you see that repeated at upland sites, and it seems to be really important. And so that somehow, either by people moving back and forth between Cahokia or Angel, or people that their ancestors came from Cahokia and eventually lived at Angel, they're hearkening back to this Cahokian cosmology and these alignments. So another interesting tidbit about southwestern Indiana is the man site which is one of the most impressive Middle Woodland Hopewell sites, is right here in southwestern Indiana, nestled right in between all of these fabulous Mississippian sites. So again, man, we're talking 1,000 years before Cahokia, 1,000 years before Mississippian culture. Man has 8 geometric earthworks and 7 mounds. You can see the map of the large earthworks, very similar to the